Lesson 19. We discussed the last chakra, Sahasrara chakra, the lotus flower with 1,000 petals, or the crown chakra. The crown chakra is the 7th chakra from below, and we talk about 7th heaven without knowing what that actually means. But it reflects a condition when we're happy. I'm in 7th heaven. It directly refers to the 7th chakra from the bottom up, crown chakra. There's also a drink. There is a drink that implies that when you drink it, you are in the 7th heaven. You know which drink that is? It's 7-Up. Yeah, it's very old brand, 7-Up. Before you had the whole variation of soft drinks that you have these days, there were only 3 different kinds of soft drinks, I think, when I was a child. There was 7-Up, Fanta, and Coca-Cola, and that was all. But never realized that 7-Up is kind of a marketing strategy to make people believe that if you drink that, it brings you to 7th heaven. In Korea, it's called Chilsong, Chilsong cider. Chilsong is the seventh star. I basically don't have to tell you any more about the crown chakra because I've been boring you with that from the very beginning of the course. But it's the most important chakra, of course, and it is the goal of yoga to bring you to the point that you start functioning based on the crown chakra. And the reason for that is that the crown chakra is the location where there is the possibility of the manifestation of what we call higher characteristics or royal characteristics. And we call them royal characteristics. Raja Yoga is royal yoga. It is yoga designed to prepare kings for leadership in the past. So it does lead to the manifestation of vision, intuition, wisdom, deep insight. A real leader needs those characteristics. And even these days, in the traditional royal houses that still exist, here and there in the world, Netherlands has still a royal house. England, of course, Great Britain, Morocco, Jordan, Thailand. There are countries that still have a royal house. Descendants of royal families, especially those that are destined to become the next king or queen, they are still being prepared for their future role of being a leader. They are surrounded by various mentors that prepare them in a similar way that yoga does. Of course, every culture has its own typical way, but the foundation, the principle is the same. And the preparation is based on creating circumstances that allow functioning from the crown chakra. Now, a leader that if you have worked in corporate life, possibly in different companies, you can clearly distinguish leaders from those who function from the crown chakra, or at least to some extent, and those who totally don't. Companies that are led by managers, by directors, who are not functioning from the crown chakra, there is always discontent among the lower ranks of the people working there. There is conflict. There is suspicion. People are constantly looking at the clock because all they want is the next coffee break or the next lunchtime, or at the end of the day, of course, to go home. The sooner the better. The leadership differentiates themselves from the employees in a very deliberate way that makes the employees not feel appreciated, not really belong. As a result, those companies are mediocre, if not losing, not profitable. Companies that are led by leaders functioning from the crown chakra, to some extent at least, they are relatively harmonious. Leaders come down from their ivory tower. They talk with people on lower levels of employment, even with the people who clean the toilets and do other menial jobs. There is harmony, there is appreciation. And when you create such circumstances, the productivity is higher. Also, very important, the turnover of employees is much lower. People stay longer in those jobs. While disharmonious, conflictuous companies, there is a constant turnover of people. People quit their jobs because they're not satisfied, because they don't feel at home there. So that company constantly has to introduce and train people for jobs. And then they leave again and they have to start all over again. Harmonious companies are much more profitable as a result of people feeling at home, not constantly looking at the clock, willing to put in some extra effort when necessary. People are just much more productive. So there's a huge difference there that is really clear. In daily life, you don't have to be a saint or a king or a queen. Every person can function with the crown chakra, regardless of whether you are from a royal family or whether you were born at the lowest levels of society in poverty. When the crown chakra is in sattva, it expresses itself in intuition. You see below page 1. And the characteristic described as that of a king, which are described in the 4th paragraph: intuition, vision, creativity, inspiration, wisdom, universal love, and a very strong memory. In a state of light, Shakti domination, this chakra expresses itself in intelligence. And in a state of light, Shiva domination, it expresses itself in love, pure love, or ananda. So a person who functions in the crown chakra is functioning by switching between intelligence and love. Those are the main ingredients of the way people function. And I used cursive characters to emphasize in the state of light Shakti domination, in a state of light Shiva domination. The reason for that is the foundation for the crown chakra to be functioning in the first place is sattva. So there is a strong foundation of sattva, and because we are not, our condition is very dynamic, it's constantly fluctuating, but at that level you're fluctuating in a very small bandwidth. So there's constant fluctuating between Shiva domination and Shakti domination, but it is very light fluctuation. So you're still in a solid sattva state with small fluctuations towards Shakti and Shiva, and that leads to a different way of manifestation of the crown chakra, intelligence and love. But as a person functioning on this level, you do not notice. There is not like a boundary in between that says, oh, now I'm functioning in the intelligence, and now I'm functioning on my heart. These are very fluid conditions that are constantly, it's almost like as if to say that the fluctuations are happening faster than light. They are working together, but one can be sometimes more stronger in its presence, and sometimes the other is a bit stronger in its presence. The condition of paradise, which you read in every holy book, the Bible is full of reference to paradise. Paradise is not a location somewhere where people are all very happy and healthy and in peace. Paradise is a condition. Sattva is paradise. Sattva leads to functioning of the crown chakra, and that is the condition that ancient people considered paradise. Growing up, being educated, we learn in every culture, because this concept exists in every culture, it's just called a different name. But the condition of paradise we grow up with, and we think it's very mythical, mysterious, and non-existent. Only the stories in the holy books where this condition exists. But it is everyday life where paradise can exist or be absent. People who function relatively from the crown chakra, they're much more, we call it being in higher spirits, literally in higher spirits, because that is where spirit is located. That means that regardless of the circumstances that you're in, you possess bliss. You can still feel happy while being in miserable circumstances when you're functioning in the crown chakra. That is the strength. That is the strength, the power of spiritual people. It allows you to still feel good and be in higher spirits, even when you go through miserable experience, miserable times. There are other words that are referring to the functioning of the crown chakra. Inspiration is one of them. Inspiration comes from the Latin word in spiritus. It literally means in the spirit. When you're inspired, you're full of enthusiasm. Your eyes sparkle. And you don't speak with your mind, you speak with your heart. You don't even know what you're saying, what you're speaking. You are enthusiastic about something, you are passionate about something, and you have automatically, as a result of that, developed deep insights. That is inspiration. It is the reason why my lectures are always different. The same subject, the foundation of the subject is the same, but the way that I explain it changes all the time. And it also changes with time based on deeper insight, evolution of my consciousness and insight. Another word that refers to functioning in the crown chakra is the word genius. Genius also comes from the word genie, which is spirit. But we talk about genius when we are referring to a person who is incredibly intelligent. How come? That is because if you develop from the bottom up, intellect awakens in Ajna Chakra, but intellect alone is not genius. It means that you can reason, it means that you can rationalize. But if you combine that with intuition, with vision, with insight, that is when genius occurs. That is why this world has many intelligent people, because of in most countries in this world these days, children are subject to compulsory education for the first 15 to 20 years of their lives. So there are a lot of intelligent people in this world, but not so many geniuses. And the reason for that is our modern education system focuses on intellectual development while neglecting spiritual development. There are some special schools where they try to also awaken spirit in line with the intellect. But people who end up becoming what we consider geniuses are people who have a highly developed intellect but are also functioning in the crown chakra, and they end up inventing revolutionary technology. They end up developing revolutionary theories like Einstein, Steve Jobs. You know, many of the geniuses that became multi-billionaires, most of them are actually school dropouts. They dropped out of college. They went through the first stages of education, elementary school or kindergarten, elementary school, middle and high school. But then often they dropped out and they started following their heart instead of continuing to subject themselves to something they were not really interested in anymore. And they ended up developing the technology that the whole world is now using, and that made them incredibly rich. That is genius. Leonardo da Vinci was a genius. 500 years before they actually were able to build a helicopter and make it work, he had already made drawings of a design of a helicopter. That man had incredible insights. Just the technique or the technology didn't exist yet to make it true, to put it into practice. All of us as yoga practitioners will have some level of genius as a result of our yoga practice. Not maybe like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Elon Musk. Well, he's a little bit controversial, but still, he came up with his genius ideas. We may not ever reach that level, but we will have much deeper understanding and insights into issues that other people will never have even the slightest notion of. Paradise, what is the opposite of paradise? Paradise and hell. So if you don't behave, you go to hell. So the idea is kind of created in religion that you must behave during your lifetime, then maybe after your death you may go to heaven, to paradise. But if you misbehave, you may end up in hell. This picture is not correct. It causes people to say, well, I don't care what happens after I die, so I just misbehave whatever I want to. That is nonsense, of course. Heaven and hell are here and now. And I tell you, most people are experiencing something of hell. They have no idea. Hell is simply suffering. Heaven is the condition in which you are not suffering. And the condition of heaven is, in the holy books, is pictured as something being up there. And where is hell being pictured? It's something down there. It's your lower emotions and desires. That is hell. not somewhere underground. It's within ourselves, within our subtle anatomy, that you find these conditions. They are not heaven and hell are not locations. They are conditions that we can find ourselves in. And if you look at it from that perspective, yoga is in fact a philosophy and a practice that if you do it correctly, it actually allows you to control whether you will experience hell or whether you will experience heaven. Now, the way that I'm telling you this, it sounds very easy, but it is not. Because we have to develop consciousness to be able to understand that condition the moment that we are in it. So the whole system is basically designed to bring us to the point that we have the sensitivity and the consciousness, the insights, to understand the condition we are in. And not only to understand the condition we are in, but also how we got into that condition. What caused it? What did we do that made us end up suffering or being happy? So, being on this path is not easy. It means we have to constantly be alert. That is what the deer in the heart chakra represents. Alertness. And it is the reason why yama and niyama are the foundation of yoga, before you even start with asana. Because yama, every time we find ourselves in trouble, you can use those 10 concepts of the yamas and the niyamas as a framework based on which you can determine how you got into your condition of suffering, how you ended up in your misery. So it's all about consciousness, and based on that, taking control. After all, this is where we started with the workshop. What is the meaning of yoga? Control. It really means control. Control of what? Control of life. And it's related to everything that we feel, everything that we do, and starting to do that mindfully, consciously. That is where the control starts. Because in the end, nobody voluntarily wants to be miserable. We just, in our ignorance, do not understand that we have a choice. And with yoga, you learn that yes, you do have a choice, but you have to do effort. It doesn't come by just reading a couple of books or by doing a couple of exercises. You really have to start integrating it into daily life and start paying attention. Be alert, like the deer in the heart chakra. What do you feel? And why do you feel it? What led to that? How did you get there? And then, very importantly, how to avoid it. We will talk about that extensively starting from lesson 31, I think. Then we have the last major subject of the course for the next 8 classes. Ego comes back. Because of this, I've talked about ego many times already. To be happier, to avoid falling into the traps that daily lives present us, it is important, it becomes more and more important to understand the role that ego plays in the misery and suffering that we experience in life, and of course more importantly in how we can avoid it. And for that, all religions and spiritual practices propose that ego must die. And I think I've already told you that ego can't die. It's not something that you can discard of, because it's inherent part of who we are. What is important and what it means for ego to die is not literal, it's symbolical. It means that we have to be able to rationalize ego. You feel ego being triggered when somebody says something nasty to you. It's what causes us to become angry. But it can also happen when somebody says something nasty, not about you personally, but about your culture, or about your favorite football club, or about the company you work for, anything that you identify with. If somebody says something negative about that, your ego is triggered and you want to retaliate. You want to get into a conflict. You want to put that person in its place. Or ego is basically the main cause for most of our conflicts, most of our suffering, misery that we experience in life. So, but it's easy to talk about ego, and many people talk about ego. You read a lot about it also in the media, often. But it's much more difficult to actually understand its essence. It's very easy to talk about ego and what not to do and what to do with it, and then you see just people just ending up not being in control of it at all, not having really understood it on a practical level at all. And that is really difficult, and because of that, I've mentioned it several times before already. Ego is an inherent part of our existence, so it cannot die. We cannot leave it out of our functioning. What we can do is learn to control it. And again, it's based on recognizing when it kicks in, how it tends to trigger something in us, and then being able to intercept, to interfere, to not allow it to end up in an action or a reaction that we then later regret. And the reason why ego shouldn't be disposed of is because ego also leads to many good things. It's like wine. If you drink a little bit of wine, it can have very good effects on your health. But if you drink a whole bottle, it becomes a poison. Ego is like that. If ego is measured and controlled, it manifests in constructive ways. But if ego is out of control, it leads to mayhem, it leads to conflict, it leads to many people getting hurt. Also important is that the second paragraph on page 2, you see that apart from the higher feelings of delight, joy, bliss, and peace, other higher feelings that are typically related to our own karma are developed in this center. These express themselves as dharma, or the characteristics that form our true essential nature, which we call svarupa. Sva means self, but self with a capital S. I explained a little bit about this when we talked about Svadhisthana Chakra, where we connect with our true self, with we make soul consciousness, we develop soul consciousness. The word dharma is very often mysteriously used in Buddhism and in yoga circles too, but dharma it just means essence. It means essence, but essence in a particular way. Every person has his own essence, and most people are not connected with that essence. They don't know who they really are because they are overshadowed. Their sense of who they are is overshadowed with how they have been indoctrinated since they were born. I am Dutch, I'm from Amsterdam, I I am passionate about yoga, and I'm a yogi, and those are all identifications. That's not who I am. Not in my soul. Most people are not aware, but practicing yoga leads to many things, of course. It leads to the functioning in the crown chakra, and within the crown chakra, you will then slowly but certainly get a hint of your heart's content. And that is when that is the reason why yoga practitioners transform. They change. People who start practicing yoga, inevitably they will be told by people who know them, family members, old friends, acquaintances. They will say, hey, you're different. They feel the change. They feel the increasing harmony in you. The manifestation of love, your heart in you. That is because you more and more become aware of your true essence. That really is Dharma. The reason why it's such a mystery in Buddhist and yoga circles is because it has something to do with your future, your destiny. Dharma is often translated as destiny. But your real destiny is determined by your conditioning until you start practicing yoga. It is the reason why many people, when they get older, they regret that they didn't follow their heart more while they could, while they were younger. Dharma is not destiny, it's essence, and it will change your destiny. Because regardless of the way that you were educated, regardless of the culture in which you were born and brought up, regardless of the influence the media has had on your development, you will find your own path based on your true essence. That is what Dharma really means. And every yoga practitioner, I've seen so many of my students with whom I stay in touch through Facebook and Instagram. I see them developing wonderful things in their lives. They come to Korea to teach. In the past, most of my students were young people who come to Korea to teach English. And they've all moved on from that and followed their dreams, many of them. Not all, of course. But that is truly the result of the transformation that yoga provides, really. You see illustration of a crown. The crown is still a symbol of the royal families. A crown is not made out of wood. It's made out of precious metal and precious stones. And the reason for that is that precious metal is precious because it's sattvic, inherently sattvic. That is why it's precious. Wearing gold jewelry on a subtle level makes us more sattvic. So the golden crown on the head of a queen or a king is a direct reference to the functioning in the crown chakra. It's symbolism, of course. You can be functioning in the Muladhara chakra and put a crown on your head. That doesn't make you a king or a queen, of course. It's symbolism, and you have to, just like us as yogis, have to do a lot of effort to function in the crown chakra. The royal families also have to do a lot of effort to be true royal. Good. Questions about the crown chakra? One more practical thing. Every chakra has a one-syllable mantra attached to it. I haven't attached much importance to the mantras because our focus is more on practical aspects, but the crown chakra is the only chakra that has a three-syllable mantra attached to it. Is Unmani. And the reason why I do mention it now is because it will be mentioned later in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, Unmani, Avashta, and the condition of Unmani, which, if you don't understand what it means, has no practical meaning, but it is directly referring to the condition of the crown chakra being open, being active, Unmani. Then Unmani is a very high mantra. Unmani. While Om is like Om. And you have different, like following the tone ladder. You go higher and higher when you go higher up the ladder of the chakras. Unmani is a very high mantra. Good. Questions? Yes?
When you were talking about knowing your condition and knowing what causes it,
Yeah.
is it possible for someone to be aware at some point of other people's conditions and what causes them because they're aware of their
Absolutely.
own, or also not be so much aware of their own feeling, but intellectually be aware of outside of other people's conditions and what causes them?
Yes, absolutely. To be a healer means that you need to be able to assess people's condition. A real healer starts with themselves. Yoga, as we learn it, is laying a foundation. Based on that foundation, you can then later specialize. Astrology, Ayurveda, and you have like some mainstream directions that you can choose after that. When people are born, they're not all the same. Some people are, from the beginning that they are born, they're more sensitive than others, more conscious also than others. And it's interesting that you mentioned it. I've never had such a question before, but it is possible that you are an empath. You know what an empath is? Yeah? That means that you feel other people's energies, especially their misery, and it makes you suffer. Those people definitely need yoga, because it is a gift, but it is a gift that works against you if you don't learn to canalize it. If you don't first learn to understand it in the first place. Understand yourself and the way that you function. So the answer to both of your questions is yes and yes. It is possible that you are aware of other people while not aware of yourself yet. That should be something that you later discover, and then you start connecting the dots and understanding everything. That is also when you start to understand the suffering that you went through while you were still young and ignorant of your ability. And the sad thing in the societies that we grow up in is that people look down on people with this special ability, because it's not understood. And therefore it is also not stimulated to work it out and to develop it. That's something that you then later choose to do by, for example, learning yoga, something like yoga, reading books. There are many books out there that can help you, that can guide you through and help you to understand what's going on with you. So the thing with this is that It leads to suffering. While we are ignorant of our empathy when we're younger, and other people do not understand and cannot help us to understand. But it's a huge source of suffering and loss of energy and therefore also health. And with yoga you can rein it in, and with that you will gain your energy and your health back. So that is, yoga in that respect is for people who have such above average sensitivity and empathy. They go together. It's the same basically. Yoga, sooner, they will find yoga on their path sooner or later, or something similar. As a person, I grew up like that. I always felt I was a black sheep of the family. I come from a big family, 7 kids. Always subconsciously, of course, not consciously, subconsciously feeling that I was different from the other 6. I thought I was the black sheep because I was the only one that was different. But later, having gone down the path that I did, I realized I was the only white sheep and the black sheeps. I mean, it's not good to distinguish and make these kind of judgments, but what I'm trying to say is that while in the past I thought I was off, I was abnormal, I was, I started to realize the value of it. That's basically what I'm trying to express. As a child, I suffered enormously because of that.
But can I ask something? But why do you focus on the pain and on the negative side of the gift of reading, let's say, a body or reading energy? Because ultimately, with yoga, it sounded like you're focusing on the pain, for example, coming back to your question, like the suffering that you experience in your own body, and maybe you're able to feel the suffering in the other. But maybe you don't feel the suffering, but you feel how you can help that person not to suffer anymore.
That is the next step. That is the next step. But when you are young and still ignorant, in an ignorant condition, you have not the insights yet, it makes you suffer tremendously. And one of the reasons is because ego comes into play. You start to identify with the suffering. That is why young people are unstable. It is part of being a teenager. When you identify with your suffering, you truly suffer. When you are able to distance yourself from the suffering, you can rationalize it and turn it into something constructive. When life presents you lemons, make lemonade. Is having a positive attitude towards the things that you encounter. To deal with that, we will, in lesson 28-29, we will discuss pratyahara. Pratyahara is the 5th limb of yoga that is very often neglected in most yoga courses, not explained properly. So we will come to that. Yeah, Jessica, please.
I don't know, but so far my experience in this course or in these lessons constantly takes me back to where I was when I was around 15, 18, depends on what we are talking about.
Yeah.
But for example, today, coming from your question when we were listening, it reminds me something that I experienced. The schooling took me to study medicine, and I practiced for some time. And my early years of practice, without noticing, took me to have a lot of insomnia. So I really had a lot of trouble to fall asleep, and I didn't know why. but I really struggled. In the other hand, while I was studying, before graduating and start practicing, I noticed that I had peaks of learning, and I was awake at 2 a.m. because for me it was easier to learn, for example. So it comes with goods and bads.
Yeah.
But this insomnia, all of a sudden stopped after I started withdrawing a little bit from my patients. What I noticed, for other reasons, I needed to put certain distance to my patients.
Did you work in healthcare?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. I was working in a company, and I was like the doctor or the physician for the employees in that company, and there were around 800 patients.
Okay.
So I was not meeting everyone, but once per year I had need to meet each of them. And so as I said, for other reasons, I needed to put certain distance to the way I was involving with my patients.
Yeah.
And I don't really recall that I was dreaming about them or that I was carrying their things with me after I was closing the door and getting out of the company. I didn't really remember having done that. But what I noticed after some time that I withdrawn a little bit from them is that I was sleeping again like a baby.
That is why pratyahara is important, not only for a yogi, but especially in healthcare.
But for me, it's interesting.
I always, when we discuss the subject of pratyahara at lesson 28, I introduce it in fact with the example of a doctor in a hospital. Doctors in hospitals have to have the ability to detach. Pratyahara we translate as detachment. You have to be able to detach, otherwise you bring all that misery home with you. Yeah. Because you deal with people who are sick, maybe sometimes even dying, or if you work in the emergency room, people are terribly wounded by accidents and what have you. And what I noticed in Korea, for example, is doctors do not understand detachment. To put into practice detachment, they just act like refrigerators. They're so cold and not passionate or engaged. They just treat you like a machine where they need to replace a screw or something. But as a doctor, I think maybe Korea is... I don't know. I think modern medicine, if you are studying to become a doctor, I think in your study you will learn something about detachment, but it's not explained properly, because what I noted, being a doctor or a caregiver in the first place is a vocation. It's something that you do out of a calling. Which means there is a compassion. You are functioning in the crown chakra. You want to help people. But then you learn in school that you must not engage. And so you start acting like a robot. So what that does is it takes out that beautiful quality that you have to want to care, to want to heal, which is what started you to want to become a caregiver in the first place.
I think at the end my learning is that you need to find certain balance.
Yes, of course.
You call it sadly, maybe sadly in that chakra. For me, it was finding certain balance between, I think I stand out what I was practicing because of my empathy, because being empathetic takes you to read things that are sometimes not even said by your patients.
Yeah.
Because you see, because you feel,
yeah.
Because you use more senses while you are practicing.
Yeah.
So I think at the end...
This is what Iman also kind of refers to. Being able to, you kind of, without knowing it, you kind of crawl into that person's skin, and you often understand them even better than they do themselves.
But it comes with practice, it comes with years, it comes with experience.
Yeah, experience, of course.
With a lot of things.
Yeah, but many people do not have that that skill, that special skill. And people like you and Iman apparently have that. I have that too.
Well, I
And
practice.
it is the reason why I teach yoga the way that I do, and not in the superficial way that you find in many other yoga studios. But pratyahara, a couple of weeks we will discuss the whole thing, and it's just really helpful to go through that.
So in my experience, it can take you to have insomnia, but at the end it was really worth it because you were able to know people, for example. So it's just a matter of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it does, what you're talking about is how it changed. At some point you had to change whether you made a choice or not, and you found that you didn't have insomnia. Because the reason why I had 2 questions was that I realize now how I changed. I feel like I was more harmonious young, and then I made me too vulnerable. And then without realizing, I closed. So intellectually speaking, I kept you call it the gift. I kept knowing, I kept noticing, whether it was me or other people. We kept working together, but ultimately it took a toll on my body.
Yeah.
And now it's become confusing to know what I feel is mine or not. But,
Yeah.
When I'm alone, I know everything very clearly, but it's still in my head. And I don't know how I just want to connect there. It helps me, because yoga has always been a practice of feeling better immediately.
Yeah.
And now I really it's expanding to past, future, present.
Yes.
And so
And that's why you ended up here eventually. Sooner or later you will find your way somewhere where your questions are answered. Yeah.
What are you studying?
I'm not studying. I went to the Sahasrara with English, even though I didn't study it at school. And then I took a break from uni, and I stayed at home a lot because I was refused for years for any sort of job. And then I made that change, and I felt called for no reason, and she tagged along, which I think was also going to take. And now I'm here. But yoga was the only constant since I discovered it when I was 16. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah, and the experiences that both of you share also show that it is our internal suffering that makes us look for change, that makes us look for new ways or new approaches. That is how we grow. So when we suffer and we identify with the suffer, that's just all it is. It's just suffering. But if we are able to detach from the suffering, we can actually come to the point that we do something constructive with it. And this is crucial. This is crucial in the discussion of pratyahara also, because we live in a world where we divide the world in good and bad. Yoga has no good and bad. Everything has a reason and a purpose. And when you label something bad, it's just a negative approach. It's not very helpful, really. But if you approach it in the way that yoga proposes, there's no good and bad. Just try to understand what is happening, why it is happening, so that you can turn it into something constructive. That you can turn the lemons, which are sour and bitter, into a nice, delicious, refreshing lemonade. And once you understand that, your suffering will not be like the suffering it was before. That you are undergoing the suffering. You see it as a signal, an indication that something needs to be, that some action needs to be taken, that some new insight needs to be developed. And that is what suffering is about. We will come to that in detail more later on. Let's have a short break.